You guys can go ahead and be seated. I hope that you are enjoying the transition in the weather. I was talking to David in the Welcome Center this morning. He said it's the perfect weather. You need a little jacket in the morning, but it's not so terrible that you're freezing all day. And I think the weathermen like to call it a wrap and peel day. So like it's supposed to get back up in the 70s today. But today, we're going to talk about trust. And so I decided to go online and see, what are some things we associate with trust, who are some trustworthy people. And I found a Gallup poll that was taken at the end of 2020 for the professions that were most trusted. And keeping in mind, obviously, we were in COVID, so some of these numbers jumped a little bit here and there, 5 to 7%. But the number one most trusted profession is nursing. Number 2 was doctors, and number 3 was teachers. Those were the only 3 professions that were over 70% when asked about the ethics of the profession being either very high or high. Clergy was at 41%. So I know. So today, I don't come to you as the associate pastor of MurrayHill.Church. Today, I come to you as an educator, so that you will listen and trust what I have to say, almost twice as much as you would have before. But we're going to talk about Elijah today, and I really like Elijah. I think if I had extra time, I would probably learn way more than I need to learn about Elijah, because I think he's a cool guy. I think he's got lots of interesting stories about him. So we're going to be in Elijah chapter 19, and we're going to be talking about trust. And so I started doing some research on Elijah, and I knew when I was going to talk today and I was going to talk about trust, I knew the story that I wanted to use from his life, and it's about him calling down fire. And so I Googled Elijah calls down fire. 3 different times Elijah called down fire. And I was like, now I like him even more. Like, he just has multiple stories where Elijah is calling down fire from heaven. And not that I have any business being a prophet or having any thing along those lines, but I would totally abuse that privilege if I was calling down fire on multiple occasions. We would be like cooking dinner, and I'm like, medium, medium, medium rare. All right, here we go. Boom, and it's done. It would be one of those things that God would get totally tired of me wanting to call down fire for absolutely terrible reasons that has nothing to do with anything that's going to promote him and the worship of him. So Elijah, in case we were ranking, we did nurses and doctors and clergy. In case we were ranking Jay versus Elijah way higher than Jay, because he did not abuse the privilege and the ability to call down fire. But we're going to be in chapter 19, and so let me give you the chapter 18 quick story so you know what happened. Elijah was tired of the Israelites not worshiping God and instead worshiping Baal, and so he challenged the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, to call down fire from Baal, or he would call down fire from God. And the Baal prophet spent all day attempting to do so. Elijah along the lines of me really liking him, started making fun of them, saying, hey, you should holler louder. Your god Baal is probably asleep, or maybe he's in the bathroom right now. Make a bigger deal, do all that kind of stuff. And it turns out Baal was unable to deliver the fire from heaven, and Elijah and God were able to do so. So the people bowed down and worshiped God. The king at the time, Ahab, after seeing his 450 prophets of Baal be very unsuccessful at the process of having Baal produce fire, went back to the palace and told his wife, the queen, Jezebel, what had happened. Jezebel, very much a proponent of Baal, and so Jezebel said to Elijah, sent word to Elijah, you got 24 hours, and I'm coming for you. And so I'm thinking, if I'm Elijah, after having just called down fire, after just having been 1 verse 450 and winning, that I'm like, bring it on. Let's go, Jezebel. Let's run it back again. I'll meet you up in Mount Carmel. Let's see what happens to you. But that's not what Elijah did. In fact, Elijah took this monumental experience where God absolutely showed up and did an amazing act and completely forgot about it and said, uh-oh, I got to go. And so that's where we're going to pick up in chapter 19 on verse 1. If you're in the Pew Bible, it's page 355. And the subtitle here, Elijah flees to Horeb. Now, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. There's the 24-hour notice. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, and he went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? There's a little bit more to the story, and if we want to read on and catch on how Elijah passed on to Elisha, you can do that, and that's a good story as well. But I look at this story of Elijah doing this amazing 100% God-empowered, God showing up, showing off. He is the one and only God. And literally like 24 hours later, Elijah has completely forgotten all of that, or is completely negating all of that and takes off because somebody's trying to kill him. Now, it was the queen, legitimately, like a pretty important person. But I look at that story and I'm like, come on, Elijah. You gotta remember what had just happened. And so I would like to think in my life, since I'm giving Elijah such a hard time in my brain, that I would have examples of me when God, shows up and when God does things that are amazing and clearly him, that I would then just be able to continue to be confident in his abilities. But that turns out not always what happens in my life either. So I have to start thinking maybe it's not just Elijah, and maybe it's not just Jay. Maybe this is something that is more common than we think, that we read these stories of other people and we're like, come on, surely that quickly you wouldn't forget what God did in your life and start to be the one who thinks that you have to be in control. And so the queen can't kill you if you run away. But again, I am reflective and I'm looking at my life. And so in the spring of 2020, pre-COVID, but just barely pre-COVID, when I was the assistant principal at Jackson, my principal got another opportunity for a promotion outside of the district, and she left and took that opportunity. So at that point in the year, I felt like it was a really good time to just transition Jay into that role, since I had been there 4 years and we needed kind of, to finish strong and to keep the continuity and everything like that. And then COVID hit and the word continuity went like out the window because we didn't know what was going on. And so I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get an email. I didn't get anything from a carrier pigeon. Nobody talked to Jay at all until they called and said, hey, the new principal at Jackson is coming this afternoon. We want you to meet her and show her around. Okay, so that means I'm not being considered for the position. Great lady, loved her, still work with her now. But to say that I was frustrated or dismayed or disappointed or any of those nice words that describe what I was would be correct and probably an understatement compared to how I was feeling. And so I'm really, not clear on why this is happening. I've kind of been there. I've paid my dues. Seems like that's a good place for me to be. And then I see all the craziness that happened with COVID in the 2021 school year. And I'm like, all right, God, you're a pretty smart guy. Pretty smart God. You saw all this craziness and I wasn't ready for it, and all the insanity that happened with online learning, and they're coming back and they're going back and they're doing this. And so many times during the 2021 school year, I thanked God that he had not put me in what I thought 6 months ago was the best position for me. God, thank you so much that I am not a principal in the middle of COVID trying to figure out how to teach children who may or may not actually be there. Just because the computer's on has no bearing on the fact that there's actually an individual behind the computer. So I'm able to see that perfect timing, and I'm able to look and say, okay, God knows what he's doing. And then this summer, I had the opportunity to become a principal, and things are going great in the summer. All the numbers are down. We're going back to normal. And then, late July, something like that, it was like, all right, everybody re-get COVID again. Here comes Delta. But we were in some kind of, we're already tired of this thing, and so we're half masked and we're not masked, and we're going to online learning, and it was insanity. And I was like, God, what are you doing? Forgetting, mind you, just 6 months ago, I'm like, God, you are on point, man. You know what you are doing. You got this timing thing down. And I'm watching, kids go to online learning, and they're like, all right, now you have to get rid of this teacher, and now you got to reschedule the building because that teacher's not there anymore. And I am a wreck. Like, I'm not sleeping. I'm barely eating. I lost 11 pounds in 2 weeks. It was terrible. And so I want to, in my prideful self, look at Elijah and be like, come on, Elijah, you know better than that. But then I look at myself and I'm like, dude, you're doing the same exact thing. Because not only can I look back a year in the 2021 school year when I was so happy that I didn't have to be a principal in that. I mean, I can look back in 2013. I had been at Ed White for 9 years, and I had been a teacher, and I had been an instructional coach, and then the grant that was paying for my position ran out. And so they were telling me I could do this thing and that thing, and none of it was really doing anything to do with teaching. It was like being test coordinator, and it was doing all this kind of quasi, you don't really have an actual job title, so we're just going to have you go around and do a bunch of other stuff. And it just so happened that one of the ladies who had worked with our school from the state moved into a position with the downtown district. And she offered me a position. And so I'm looking at staying at Ed White, doing this weird thing that I don't really know exactly what it is, or transitioning to a new spot downtown where I go from a 10-month employee to a 12-month employee, which is not great necessarily to work more. But the really not great thing about it is I have to take an $8,000 pay cut to go work more months. But I did it, and one of the best decisions, one of the greatest things I can look back on, as it kind of changed my trajectory, and I can't honestly tell you that I would still be in education if that transition and that change didn't happen. And so I can look, back in 2013 and see God knew what he was doing. He's got this timing thing down. And then looking at the same thing in 2017. I had been at the district office for 4 years, 2 of those as a specialist, 2 of those as a supervisor, being in charge of specialists, and there was a director position that came available, and I was like, all right, I've got great scores. We're scoring, some of the highest we've ever done in the history of the school. All the science scores are looking great. I'm going to apply for this director position. Surely they can see all the great things I've done, so I ought to be a shoo-in for that. I did get an email on this application, and it said, it didn't actually say this. I'm going to say it much meaner than what the email said, because the email was very polite and nice. It said, don't bother interviewing for this job. You have only been a supervisor for 2 years. You have to be a supervisor for 3 years to interview for this job. And so, out of spite, I started looking for another job. And God's timing, like it always has been, worked out that my previous boss from 2013, who hired me away from Ed White, had just been promoted to the principal at Jackson, and her vacant assistant principal position was open. And I had the ability to go and reconnect with her, to go and learn under her again, someone who I trusted, someone who had my best interest at heart, someone who was working to make me better than I was. And so I have all of these times in my life when I know that God's timing is right, that God's plan is being put into place in maybe not the most consistent way in the middle of it, but when I look back, it makes total sense. And so there's a few things, I've read this story plenty of times, but there's a few things that when I was doing the research and looking at the commentaries this week that I didn't know, that I thought were significant. So the places that he went are a way that God is able to remind him of all the ways that he has sustained his people and all the times where his promise has continued. So in verse 3, when it says Elijah was afraid and ran for his life when he came to Beersheba in Judah, that's the location where Abraham was asked to go sacrifice Isaac. And you talk about a trustworthy time. When you take your son to an altar, hoping and praying all along that something's going to change, but getting all the way there, tying down, that's a moment of trust. In verse 8, so he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb. That 40 days and 40 nights can be reflective of the 40 years that the Israelites wandered in the desert, because based on where they believe he was, in verse 4, he went a day's journey from Beersheba. They estimate the amount of time it should have taken him to go from Beersheba to Horeb as 14 days. And yet, for some reason, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights instead of just 14 until he reached Horeb. That's the name given to Mount Sinai, where Moses also had an encounter with God, receiving the Ten Commandments. And so I look at this question at the end of verse 9, and the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And God, like a good investigator, doesn't ask questions he doesn't know the answer to. He doesn't actually need Elijah to tell him why he's there, though Elijah does. That question is asked for reflection purposes. Elijah, thinking back over all of our experiences together, thinking back over the number of times that I have kept my promise with the Israelites, what are you running for? Why are you here? Why are you in a cave? When time after time after time, I've shown my love and I've shown my commitment. And so I think for me, maybe for you now, maybe for you at other times, if we sat down, if we were still in the middle of what was a real strong conflict in our life, I wonder if God wouldn't ask us the same question. What are you doing here, Jay? You think I just forgot about you? You think that I'm not aware of every single step you're taking? The people that I know you're going to impact? And not that he needs my explanation of why I can't sleep and why I can't eat and how hard it is to reschedule a building. But he needs me to stop and to look back and to remember regardless of how crazy it may be today or this week or this entire school year. I'm not forgotten. He's here. If I'll listen and act and follow his leadings, in 5 years when I'm standing up here again, maybe, it'll be a funny story. Because I promise you in August, all of this now, it's kind of funny in November, 0% funny in August. Really terrible in August. And I don't even know necessarily that it's funny now, but reflective and looking back. Why was there a time that I was so unsure? I legitimately, each morning when I backed out, saw my trash and recycling that never got picked up and started doing the math. Like, if Aaron goes back to the classroom and I start driving a trash truck, I bet we can come pretty close to getting the same amount of money that I'm making now. It's not good. And I found this worship song that I listen to every morning going to work for at least the first month. It's called Tremble. It says this: peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break at your name. Still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still. Every wave at your name. Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, you silence fear. And so I think that reflective question is what I want to leave you with today. That if you're in the middle of the craziness, that God is asking you, what are you doing here? If things are going amazing in your life, that you're super connected, write that question down to yourself and stick it in your pocket. Because though I have a mere 39 years on this planet, they haven't all been smooth sailing. Haven't all been crazy and riddled with storms. But it is back and forth and back and forth. And I hope, and my prayer for myself, my prayer for you, is that the next time the storm rages, the next time I start doubting if God knows what he's doing or if his timing is right or if he's paying attention to the craziness that is going on in my life, that I'll be able to more quickly hear him ask, what are you doing here, Jay? Remember all I've done. My word is true. My promises are the same today as they were thousands of years ago. And so when we go out and have opportunities to connect with people, whether it's large events like what we did with Murray Halloween, whether it's something individual with you, your family, your neighbors, know that the peace that God can provide, the fact that in the middle of the storms, if you hear that question, if you reflect more quickly on all that God has done, that peace is there. And you being a person in this world in 2020 who can have peace? That's weird. Because TV is not peaceful, and social media is not peaceful, and so many relationships and work environments are not peaceful. But God provides to us the ability to look back, see evidence of his work in our lives and in the lives around us to give us that peace. If you don't have it, ask for it. Let's pray.